Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic Podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. We are here to reclaim the sacredness of all of them. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. Hey, women. Thank you so much for being here on the Moon Baby Magic podcast. My intention in everything I do at Moon Baby Magic is to support women in coming home to the sacredness and power that lives within their very bodies. So if you'd like to go deeper, a few resources for you. You can follow me on Instagram. I love to connect with women there. You can get the Womb Cycle Spotify playlists, your period prep guide, book an in-depth one-on-one virtual session, or shop herbal goodies. All of these are always included in the show notes of every episode, and I hope that they support you. Thank you. Let's get on to the show. Welcome back, women. It has been such an eventful and beautiful and intense week with the full moon eclipse and moving into autumn and all of the energy that comes with that. So autumn is really a time that reminds me to slow down. I've already been feeling the tiredness, the slowness, even though I'm in my ovulatory window. And really the crispness of the air is coming in here, and it feels wonderful and new and like it changed that I feel like a lot of us really needed after the heat of the summer. And not just the heat of the weather, but the heat of the doing in the summer. Summertime is really a season of doing, doing, doing. And for someone like me, whose constitution tends to be just a bit slower, summer can be a little bit intense. So I really thrive when the weather changes and the energy changes, and we move into this slow and kind of somewhat somber of a time that autumn is. But autumn holds so much magic for us in it. There's a witchiness that comes through. There's gatherings with family and friends. There's warming spices and so much goodness. So I hope that you're creating space for yourself to honor this change of season and be present to whatever is arising. And I hope that this episode slows you down too. So this is a really fun episode we have today. Today we have on the podcast Amy. Amy has an incredibly interesting life path that has included both intellectual path of higher education, mythology, and a very embodied path of womb work, tantra, and motherhood. Amy takes us on a journey from her traumatic first bleed and her first marriage at 21 to later owning her own sexuality, becoming a living embodiment of each wisdom goddess that she has had the opportunity to pass through. In this episode, Amy also graces us with her knowledge on each of the 10 Mahavidyas, which are the wisdom goddesses that characterize each phase of womanhood and each phase of our menstrual cycles. Yes, you heard that right. Not your normal 4 that you hear. There are 10 in this tradition. This conversation is incredibly dynamic, interesting, and it will make you laugh, cry, gasp, and smile from deep in your hearts. Let's dive in. Welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for being here. I know this is going to be such a good conversation.
Thank you for having me, Natalie. I'm excited. I don't get to talk about girly stuff as much as I would like.
I know, we were just talking about that before recording, like having 3 boys and like needing to find an outlet to share the womb wisdom.
Definitely. I turned to my husband 2 nights ago. I was like, I'm going to start women's circles again, like moon circles ones. And he was like, another thing? You're going to do another? When? Why right now? And I was like, I need it. I need women. And I said, it's just once a month, just the new moon ones, not like what I was doing before, because I definitely burnt out everyone before with how many different circles I was wanting to have all the time for all the reasons. And this one, I'm like, no, I want this, like what you and I are about to talk about.
Yeah, and like it's great that we can do this virtually. And it's also so special to have like your in-person group of women who come together once a month just to like drop in. And especially on the new moon, that's just such
Mhm.
a sacred time for women to gather and be in the magic of womanhood.
It's always like slightly selfishly motivated for me. It's like I shouldn't feel bad about. I'm really open about that bias whenever women attend. Like, hi, I want friends. I want my cycle to be synced. I want I want the oxytocin that comes from this. I want girl time. Okay, thanks. Thanks for being that for me right now. This is why it's free, because otherwise, if I was charging you, we'd be in a really weird position.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I've been hosting a virtual circle and it's like, yeah, this is the cyclical living circle. Let's come and like I'll teach you about stuff. But it's also like I'm traveling and I want friends every month.
Yeah, it's very, it's real. It's so real. That sisterhood desire is so real. And if we don't have it, like, I'm an only child, and I loved my girl cousins. I loved getting to spend time with them. I love my boy cousins too, but it was an
Mhm.
entirely different dynamic. And being
Yeah.
just with girls is an entirely different situation. And with women now, I can see it in certain relationships, this like just deep, deep bond of we cannot talk for a long, long time. And then the minute we do talk, oh yeah, it's so easy. It's there. It's like this deep rooted space. And then there's other women where I'm reflected back the sister wound that I've experienced in
Mm.
my life, where they just don't open up, or they don't trust, or they're putting up a really beautiful face because they're scared of the ugly parts of themselves.
Mhm.
And so like we can't go deeper until they're willing to. And it's really interesting to witness who shows up in the online spaces versus in the in-person spaces, because there is a
Wow.
different kind of, I think, vulnerability to being physically present. Like when I've done online circles, it's a range of women,
Yeah.
and when I've done in-person ones, oh no, we're here for this. This is the
Mhm.
energy that I'm holding right now. This is the energy that you're seeking right now, and it's way more potent for these deep combos, whereas the other one's way more potent for spreading these seeds of possibility,
Mhm.
because like one is reaching the masses and the other one is reaching the depths, and neither's better. It's different, and I'm seeking the depths right now because I feel like with all that's been going on in my life, and anybody can go check out my Instagram later if they feel like it. I'm really seeking some nourishment, some quality deep downtime with sisterhood to feel replenished so that I can keep showing up for my rambunctious voice.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's such a good point. In the online space, I feel that too, that it's like really reaching a lot of women who maybe had no idea about anything in relation to their womb or their blood, or even just like the importance of gathering with sisters, or women who have been like, oh, well, I just thought I get this a lot online. Like people come into my virtual circle saying, like, oh, I didn't know like women could be nice, or I just thought like female friendships were difficult, and still kind of in that paradigm. Whereas you're right, the in-person circles, it's like you've got to have done, and of course you don't have to, but the women who come tend to have done some inner work around sisterhood
Yeah,
to even want
definitely.
to be in a group of a bunch of women. Because if you haven't done the work around sisters, I always say, like, I've always been a girl's girl. Of course, I've had my own sister wounds that I've worked through and will always work through, but a lot of women have to do that work to become a girl's girl.
Yes, yeah. I was one of them. I still am one of them on so many levels, where when I was really young, and this goes back to mother wound, and it's an ancestral mother wound, where I didn't connect fully with my mother, who didn't connect fully with her mother, who's so my grandmother, she didn't connect fully with her mother because she was told by her own mother, my great grandmother, that she had wanted to abort her because she
Wow.
couldn't handle any more kids because it was the Great Depression. It was 1931, and she
Wow.
didn't want to have that baby, but she was the daughter of a pastor, and it just wasn't going to happen. So she had the baby, and my great great grandmother was the one who cared for my grandmother for those first few days while my great grandmother grieved having another child. In her postpartum, she just couldn't connect with my grandmother, and that imprint was so strong that it carried down through the lineage of disconnect, mother to
Mm.
mother to mother. And I'm breaking that cycle in a lot of ways because I don't have a daughter. Like, not having a daughter automatically changes the story, but
Yeah.
also recognizing the tumultuous relationship that my own mother had with her mother
Mm.
stemmed from the lack of desire that my great grandmother had for her baby. And who knows what was going on in her life? I didn't get a chance to interview her. I was 14 when she passed,
Mm.
but the fact that I got to see her live to her 100th birthday was really cool.
Wow.
Um, and so there's like this very deep narrative that I've been unraveling in terms of threads coming to me. And when I was a child, not having that deep mother nourishment connection, I feel like out of all the stories in Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, the famous Women Who Run with the Wolves, the ugly duckling one really, really sat with me because I was like obsessed with that story as a child, and I can never explain it because I wasn't like
Wow.
an ugly child. But like, if I look back at the pictures, yeah, maybe I was awkward in those awkward
Oh, we
years
all
of
were.
like, yeah, who wasn't? Braces and glasses and strange haircuts. But the beauty was there. So why did I feel like an ugly duckling all the time? And then reading that story and recognizing the archetype of the unmothered child and the child who
Mm.
didn't have a mother who could be present, and seeing that, and then seeing how it impacted my perception of every female relationship, where I gravitated towards either older women for friends because I was looking for that mother figure,
Mm.
or too much younger women because then I could be the mother figure.
Wow.
And I really rarely sat with peers, where I would spend time in the library with the librarian because she was like a mother figure, or I would go volunteer in the kindergarten classroom because they were all like children. And I didn't really connect as strongly with the other girls in my classes as I could have. I didn't go to sleepovers. I didn't like do the girl thing. So then I started identifying as the girl who gets along with guys because it felt so
Right.
much safer. And I am grateful that I feel safe with the masculine. I don't think every woman has that blessing. I don't think every woman can speak to a life without abuse or without some sort of event happening that creates a different kind of story. So that's not my story. And I am very, very grateful that I've always felt held and supported and witnessed and loved by the men in my life.
Mm.
Um, Maybe that's why I'm a mother of boys. I just am like so safe with dudes.
Aw.
Come on, bring it in. And I always identified as a girly girl before having the babies. So they've pushed my edges into like, yep, we're peeing in the woods. Yep, we have not taken a shower for several days and we are fishing. We are covered in fish guts, and that's okay. And the rain is here and we're covered in mud, and that's okay.
That's amazing.
All the edges. I was like, I just want to wear a dress and drink tea, okay?
That's why you need your women's circles.
Well, I need my women's circle because then I wear dresses and drink tea. All my Christy Dawn dresses. So like that's my idea of myself. And then here I am on this interview in like a big t-shirt and shorts because I was just with the boys before this. So yeah, it's interesting how that mother wound then exacerbated a sister wound.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I would say, yeah, it was my last year of graduate school, which is a whole other story in and of itself, that I was exploring what it could look like to be in sisterhood. And I found it through goddess spirituality and through earth spirituality and like coven practices and meeting around the moon. And that lunar cycle really then gave me the foundation to encounter other women who were seeking similar situations. And then eventually, after I stepped into a partnership with my husband now, I was able to open up my own women's circle for the first time. And we ran it continuously for 3 years, just in different women's homes every month. And it grew so big that we started renting studio space.
Uh,
And it was like, whoa, what is happening? And then I went down a different rabbit hole where instead of seeking the sisterhood connection, I was starting to seek more spiritual stuff that wasn't related to the womb mysteries or to the red thread or that specifically. It was way more into other types of practices, and people just weren't resonating with that. The women who were coming were like, that's not for me. I didn't come to this for that. So I stepped away from circles for a bit to figure out what I wanted, but I still am recognizing where that nourishment of the monthly meeting in and of itself is magic and how I can tap into that again. But I have to come at it from a place of already being nourished to a certain extent. Like if I am not managing my health, my sleep, my love life, all of it, then I'm not going to be able to show up for the women who are coming. And so I have been holding off, opening that back up in a very tangible way by myself because I want to be fully resourced before I step into that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something for any woman who's considering opening circles, just making sure the resources are in place beforehand, because it can be really easy to burn out if you're not. I'm sorry, can you hear the kids shouting in the next room?
No.
Okay, good. Yeah, if one is not fully resourced and one is not in a space of feeling nourished already, and one is not trauma informed or a therapist or any of those other things, then when we open up these circle spaces, it can be quite a container to hold. It can be a lot to witness. And that was something that happened to me the first year that I was running them. I was like, whoa, I did not realize the kinds of stories that were going to come up. I knew some stories were going to come up that would be intense, but I didn't realize like what kind of cry fest would be happening. We don't have enough cookies present to satiate what's going on.
Yeah.
So like potluck next month, everybody bring something. Because it was an eye-opening experience to see how blessed my upbringing was. That yes, there are parts of it that are heartbreaking, but most of it was very, very safe and protected and sweet. And being in that position, I didn't know what I was stepping into for a lot of other women.
Yeah. Yeah, it brings up so much. And I think most women, when they come, they're kind of surprised. I know when I was leading circles, like women would cry, and at the end, they'd be like, wow, I had no idea that this was going to happen. I don't usually cry in public. There's that all the time. Women are like, I don't usually cry like this. And it's like, well, in the presence of safety of other women, like you can let your guard down and things come up to be healed, and there's sisters there to hold that. And you're right, like you have to be well resourced yourself to be that safe space for other women. And yeah, I mean, I also think it's so beautiful. I just want to pull on that thread of like feeling safe with men too. Like that's a really cool and powerful imprint for you to have from growing up. And you're right, I don't think a lot of women have that. A lot of women, including myself, have had to really work on healing their relationship to men. So that's a beautiful, beautiful imprint to have had.
Yeah, I'm so grateful. Like I can think of one or two moments with a first boyfriend or like in a position where maybe I drank a little too much that weekend and I was getting close to a space where I could have been violated or where I could have the way that I would see it, have a boundary crossed, right? And I was either able to find my voice and say no thank you, or I was able to really presence myself even in that state and say I'm choosing this right now. Like I am choosing this experience because either I don't want to be a part of my day-to-day reality and so I'm escaping it, or I'm choosing this experience because I'm sad and I want to feel held and loved, and so I'm turning to him for comfort, or I'm choosing this experience because I'm done being a good girl. that,
Valid.
that was the one that happened the most often. Like, let's do this, bro. Like, and they were always very pleased to fulfill that for me. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a choice. This is a choice right now, and I'm not going to pretend like it's not.
Yeah.
And I was very indoctrinated in my childhood with evangelical Christian values, and guarded my body as a sacred space very, very strongly through most of high school. And when I started stepping out of that Christian paradigm and understanding other world religions and other spiritual walks, I still carried that my body is a temple mentality, which I think was another blessing, because most women that I knew around me were having very casual hookups and very casual experiences. And even though I did have a few what could be termed casual experiences, they weren't casual in my mind. I was doing a lot of priestessship work with different love goddesses like Venus and Freya and Isis, and really deepening my understanding of what it was to carry that energetic code of the rose lineage, and saying like, hey, even though I don't know this man very well, I'm going to be a goddess in his life right now in this moment.
Mm.
And it was still a sacred union on some level, where I wanted to show up as the divine feminine for him in whatever capacity that was going to look like. And I didn't take it casually, even though it could have been. And I can still name everyone, so it's not like tons of experience, but still that ability to place sex as a sacred act, I think kept me in that safe relationship with the masculine. It wasn't something to be thrown away. It wasn't something to be abused. It wasn't something to ignore or repress. It was something to be treasured. And so I was going to treasure every experience. And in that space, I had several men comment back like, whoa, this is different. This feels different. Like, yeah, because I do tantra. Like, yay, 20-something Amy.
Oh, no, I love it. I mean, it's beautiful. I love that you said that you were always aware that, you were choosing something. And I think that that's a unique place to be. And yeah, it takes a lot of like ownership over your choices and your life to be able to say, we were both in the radical birth keeper school. So like
Yeah.
that's a big part of it, is like owning your choices. So being like, yeah, like right now I'm committed to escaping through this experience. And okay, that's what I'm doing. Cool. Let's do it. But I also think it's so beautiful that you chose to show up as a goddess, in all of these relationships, and chose to like really claim your own sexuality and not feel like that was something that was like being taken, or that you were like, yeah, like had some sort of weird perverted relationship with. And I also want you to just share a little more for women who may not be familiar, like what the rose lineage is.
Yeah, that's a great weaving of where to go from here. So I would say that there was a blip in my life where I was really not in touch with my sexuality in a healthy way, and that was in my first marriage.
Mm.
Um, it was a very innocent interaction when we first came together, and it was very sacred leaving that Christian paradigm space where I didn't have anything else to replace it yet at that point. And that first husband and I, though, we were really young. I was 21 when we got married, and the sexuality faded between us because he was dealing with his own mental health, and I was not fully owning, like we talked about in RBK. I wasn't owning my experience in a lot of ways. I was very codependent, and it was out of that feeling of disconnect and discomfort and I would say, numbness that was happening in that relationship, that I started seeking where connection could be found. And I started exploring what that might look like. And at first, it was only artistic, creative endeavors, which we know that's the other side of sexuality, is creativity for women. And I work, we'll get to it eventually because it's such a crucial part of my path, the Mahavidyas, the 10 wisdom goddesses of India. And for those two, the two who dance on that coin, if you engage with one, that's sexuality, then you're going to engage with creativity on the other. And on the flip side, if one is engaged with that's creative, then the other one, the sexuality, will flourish and it will bloom. So for me, it was the creativity first, and then I met someone, as one does, and it was this eye-opening moment of what sexuality could be. And that experience I've written about, and like, I have plans for a red thread book. We'll see how soon that comes about. But if it does, that story is in there, of this moment of spiritual presence and no words for it, while engaging with another human being and recognizing, oh, this is what I have been missing, because I had it intuitively, instinctively in my mind as a child, and I had no words for it. Not a child, but like a young woman. And then I didn't have it for a long time. And now I'm finding it again, and I'm finding it here, and I'm recognizing I want more. What is this? So that's when I started diving into Tantra. That's when I started diving into the Rose lineage, which for me came about once I met my husband. One of his teachers had offered the book, The Magdalene Manuscript, to him to read. And he read it before I did, which, like, that means he's the right one. And so he gave me the Magdalene Manuscript to read, and I just dove in, and it talks about this energetic frequency that's come to the planet wave after wave after wave as humans have shifted and moved through our different cultures and civilizations. And each archetype of the feminine that comes in is bringing in love and truth and beauty in her own way. And sometimes it's Hathor from Egypt, sometimes it's Isis from Egypt, sometimes it's Mother Mary, and sometimes it's Mary Magdalene, and sometimes there's other ones who, depending on which teacher a person works with, will be called in as part of that line of really wonderful wisdom keepers who work with the womb specifically to create magic in the world. And I was so inspired by that Rose lineage that I really just started diving into devotion with that. And I had very closely in timeline, like talking chronological things, very close in that timeline, started studying yoni steaming and womb healing through physical practices like trauma release therapy and shaking and steaming itself, and then drinking herbs and bathing in herbs, and doing practices like dry brushing and oil pulling and all of that with Kelly Garza and with a couple other wise women who were in the local community who did Ayurveda and Chinese medicine and all of those things. So I was really diving into that, as well as the energetic side of visualizing the womb, doing womb heart connection meditations and flow. And it was from there that I met, this was after I had my first son. When I was pregnant with my second, I met Uma Dinsmore Tooley. And she is this just phenomenal old school yogini from the UK who is married to a man from India, and they work together on a lot of these beautiful tantric things. And she's the one who wrote the book Yoni Shakti, which takes the 10 wisdom goddesses of India, the Mahavidyas, who are all emanations of Kali, Jai Kali Ma, and lines them up with the menstrual cycle and with the woman's rites of passage cycle. So she's combining every stage of womanhood with one of these wisdom goddesses, and Kali holds the center of the wheel that turns, and Tara holds the surrounding space of the wheel that turns, and then the other 8 are in between. So instead of being a 4-fold moon phase, it's an 8-fold moon phase.
Oh, wow.
It's really deep and beautiful and wonderful. And I was, oh, so excited that she came in person. She did a US tour and I got to do her workshop in person. And I was nursing a baby, pregnant with another baby, trying to do yoga nidra. She was so generous in letting me have my son there, and he was just wiggling around and she's playing her harmonium, and it was awesome.
Okay, wow. So this sounds so magical. I mean, there's so much I could pull on from there, but I'm very curious to hear more. They're called the Mahavidyas.
Maha, great Vidya, wisdom. So
Okay.
the great wisdom of India. And she's the first one who ever associated them specifically with menarche, sexuality, creativity, pregnancy and birth, postpartum. Like there's one who is just postpartum. And the image of her in India, she's cut off her own head and is holding the sword in one hand and her head in the other. And the blood coming out of her is being caught by sisters standing on either side. And the
Wow.
sisters are holding these bowls and they're being nourished by her own blood. And she's being nourished in turn. Her head is one of the ones drinking. So, like, they're all being healed by her own lifeblood, essentially. So it's just like postpartum when we're in that raw, vulnerable, open, totally like psychic state, and everyone around us is just soaking in that golden glow that happens when a mother and a baby are skin to skin and nursing, and everyone's like, oh, it's so new and precious and wonderful and life is amazing. And she's just crying all the time as a mother because like now the baby's outside of her and what do you do? And just that place of being is so well represented by this goddess. That alone like touched my heart. But I'm excited to meet the other ones because they continue into perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. So it breaks down that last phase of life from just crondom to like multiple layers. And I keep joking that I'm going to be that like 80-year-old new vitality type of woman walking into the house, because just because I'm on crone don't mean I'm dead yet. And there's this space of like, oh, now we're stepping into the one who's ready to die. And that's the final phase. And getting into that it's an entirely different way of approaching the crone to me, where there's like the wise woman who's no longer bleeding and who's got a lot to offer and is seen as an elder in her community, and she's able to serve the other women who are in the other phases because she doesn't have to tend to her own cycle in that way, but she's not dead yet. And then there's the woman who's like, I'm done. I'm not tending community. I'm not tending myself. I am simply sitting in my garden and drinking tea and like allowing the spirits to come to me because I'm about to cross over to the other side. And that final crone phase, I think most of us don't meditate on. And when I've led various groups of women through the mysteries using these goddesses as guides really for the meditations, when we get to that one, everyone's just like weeping because most of us don't envision the end of our lives. We don't envision stepping into death. And we talked about all the time in RBK, death and birth go hand in hand, and we're just being born into a new phase when we die. So for me, it was really humbling and beautiful and just so potently filled with wisdom to encounter these goddesses at that time when I was pregnant and postpartum with another baby, because they're only 14 months apart, my first two.
Wow, that's close.
Yeah, that was like, that was not planned. Not a conscious conception. Like it was. We knew it. We knew it the second it happened. My husband and I looked at each other and I said, yep, that's it. There it is. We did that. And meanwhile, our 6-month-old was like sleeping, not too far away. We just looked at him, we looked at each other, and went, okay, here we go.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, it's having them as a very strong perspective of life every month, as well as over the course of an entire life, I think is a wonderful tool for any woman who wants to look it up.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, because, on this podcast, I obviously talk a lot about the maiden, mother, sorceress, and crone archetypes, which are quite like wide reaching archetypes. So, the maiden is really like from the time we're born until either we have children, or for a lot of women, even without having children, it happens around like 29 Saturn return time. And then we're in that phase until, perimenopause. And then we start to move into the realms of the sorceress. And then we move into crone in when, we're in the crone phase of elderhood. And I've always heard, when I took the blood mystery school, and Nancy Lucina talked a lot about how in crone there is that sense of almost returning to youthfulness, like you were speaking to, where it's just like, like I'm just here to be alive and youthful and silly and playful again. There's like a letting go.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think a lot of women think about their crone years in general. And I love that the way that you share about it in the sense of the two different phases, and that there's two different goddesses for each of these wider arc phases of our life and for our cycle. So I wonder if you could do like a brief like overview.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be super in depth because I know we don't have all day. And then what I'd also love is for you to share like maybe with both the maiden, mother, sorceress, crone sort of group, and then with your group, like which phase you're in your life and in your cycle.
Yeah. So right now I am very much mother. Like mother in life, right? I've got he'll be 16 months next week. And oh, he's showing up. We're talking about you. There's nothing in it. It was just water from, sorry, my cacao.
All good.
Which is a mother thing. I'm obsessed with cacao because she is a mother archetype, that plant, that her plant energy is a mother. And I didn't realize why I was so obsessed with cacao for so long. Like going back to that mother wound thing, when I drink her, I feel nourished, I feel held by the mother. So like every day I'm just sitting there in front of cacao. And the phase of my life I'm in is mother, very much so. I could still consider it postpartum in my world because I haven't done a closing of the bones yet. I don't like to do that personally until I'm getting ready to finish my nursing relationship. I still feel like it's such a strong dyad to be nursing full time, and I'm nursing through the night. So I don't like to do closing of the bones until I'm ready to start closing that chapter of my body is connected fully to his body. Which we can talk about for a second in postpartum. Anyway, the monthly cycle I'm in, I'm also right at the beginning of ovulation time. And I was laughing because I was thinking about this podcast this week and like prepping of like, where am I, since you ask everyone. And I looked down and I was like, yep, that's a different color cervical mucus.
Yeah.
Like, okay, here we are talking about that. And if I say cervical mucus in front of my husband, he just like rolls his eyes. He's like, ugh, too much information. I don't want to hear it. No, I don't want to hear it. Like, you love that space. Let's honor it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm in my ovulatory window too. And I like always know I'm gearing up to ovulate when this happened to me like 5 days ago. So I ovulated yesterday and my like peak cervical mucus started like 5 days ago. And it's like, every day I'm wiping and it's like dry, dry, dry. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoop.
There we are. Hello. Have
Like,
you seen Ali Wong's Baby Cobra?
I don't think so.
In Ali Wong's Baby Cobra, there's a moment where she says in her youth she could like reach down and like bring it up like a bubble wand. I always think of that, and she's like running across the stage going, I slime you, I slime you.
Oh my gosh, I need to see this
description of ovulatory week because that's what happens. It gets real juicy. And yeah, I'm in that phase. And I looked at my husband last night because we were finally gonna have some alone time. It's like, bro, I want you and you clearly want me and you know why. My hormones are saying, let's do this again. So be careful. Like, get out of there fast. And he was like, all right, we got this. We're gonna be fine. We're gonna enjoy it till the last second. And then afterwards, he's like, I was holding back so hard, like so hard. I thought that it was over, and then I was scared that I had let something go. Well, it didn't feel like it. I would know. So it was really funny because we do have that conversation all the time as a couple of
Yeah.
where am I in my cycle? I'm
Yeah.
at this place in my cycle. This is why I look so bloated right now, or this is why
Mhm.
I'm so emotional right now, or this is why I'm so like just very interested in you taking off your pants right now, or this is why I don't want to look at you right now. Like whatever
Yeah.
it is. And he's really in tune to that flow.
That's
And he's gotten to the point where he's like a pretty well-known yoga teacher here in town, and he has giant classes, so he has a lot of people from all walks of life coming through his yoga classes. And every time he sees women who are like pregnant or who are like on the floor weeping, like he's able to speak to them in a way that a lot of other yoga teachers who are male might not.
mm.
And they're like, how did you know? It's my wife.
That's sweet. What a special
Yeah.
gift that you can. I think that's actually really important that like us women are talking to our partners about these things, not just for them and relating with us, but they're going to interface with many other women in their lives. And so to be able to understand someone else's experience is such a gift.
It's beautiful to watch. And he'll, if he sees a woman who's pregnant coming consistently, and then she doesn't come for a while, he's like, okay, she's having the baby. And if she comes back like right after, he's like, how far postpartum are you? And they might say like, oh, I'm only 4 weeks. And he'll say, go home.
Like
Like, you
rest.
should be in bed. The first 40 days are so important.
That's sweet.
It's
It's like, and
the
someone should
best.
be taking care of you.
Yeah, like why aren't you in there with socks on your feet and a yoni steam box by like next to the bed and soup in your lap? Like you should be
Yep.
holding soup right now.
Yep.
So
I love
he's
that.
like, get out of my class. I don't want to see you for another 2 weeks. It's so
I
good.
love that.
Okay, so this wheel, this beautiful wheel
Yeah.
that Uma formulated with the blessings of the Mahavidyas and all of their wisdom. The first phase, she's actually corresponded to what you would see as like the sliver of a crescent. So she doesn't do maiden as new moon, she does maiden as new moon, like the
Mm,
actual
yeah.
new moon that's visible, which to me makes sense. It's like the
Yeah.
the first bud blossoming in spring. And we don't see maidenhood as part of winter. We see it as spring, but we can see it as the beginning of spring when the
Mhm.
crocuses and daffodils are coming up. So it's
Yeah.
that space. And the goddess there is Tripura Sundari, which means the beauty of the three worlds, which like, so gorgeous.
That's amazing.
Um, and she represents menarche, the first blood, as well as the phase in a girl's life where she's going from girl to woman. So she's not um, engaging in sexuality other than maybe some self exploration, just to be like, oh, I have a vulva. Wow, that's new. And and she's also not producing a lot of things. She's like, she might be learning skills, but she's not creating in the world per se yet. So it's this maybe like the teen years is probably the best equivalent, but for some women this can extend before and after. Like for myself, I had a really traumatic menarche, which is probably why I haven't talked about it.
We could talk about it if you
We
feel
can talk
open
about
to
it.
it.
So I'll touch on it briefly since we're talking about this first maiden phase. And I knew the concept of sex. I knew the basic mechanics of sex, but I didn't know about menstruation. My mom had not taught me about
Oh,
menstruation at all. I knew that sometimes blood came out of her and she was really angry about it. But I
that-
didn't know anything else beyond that point. I thought pads were just like something she put in her underwear sometimes. I didn't understand any of it.
mm,
And I was 10 years old. I like just turned 10 when I looked down and I had had a stomach ache and I didn't understand why. and I looked down in the toilet and there was just massive amounts of blood. And I thought I was dying. And because I didn't understand that women bled. I had no concept of that at all. So I was like screaming and afraid and trying to wipe it up. And I ran downstairs and I was like, oh, Mom, something's wrong. Something's wrong. She's like, what's going on? My stomach was hurting. And then all of a sudden there's blood everywhere. And she's like, oh no. And her reaction was so diminished that I was like, you knew about this? Wait, what? And she's like, it's not supposed to come this early. And like she went and got pads. Yeah, it was very like, that's what I remember, was her being very resistant, very disappointed, very just like casual, and like, this is because, you know, Eve sinned, so you have to deal with it now.
Wow.
That makes no sense. So that was the explanation that was given to me of, this is going to come every month and I'm going to give you some like medication to help with the pain, and if you have to stay home from school, you have to stay home from school. And then I had to tell my gymnastics coach, and I was really embarrassed because I needed to be able to put pads on inside of my leotard, and like, how am I going to hide that? And I'm supposed to still be running and jumping and doing all these things while massive amounts of blood are coming out. And I had heavy periods. They were usually about 10 days long. Crazy cramps, like debilitating cramps, headaches, all sorts of stuff. And my mom didn't think I should take pills, so she would grind up that what's it called? I don't even remember now. I blocked it out. Whatever you're supposed to take pharmaceutical wise for PMS stuff. She would grind it up and put it on a spoon in like powder form and force me to take it so that my cramps wouldn't be so bad. It was awful. And I remember, because of the gymnastics thing, deciding to just use tampons before even telling her, and like stealing some from her and shoving it in and it hurting and not knowing why. And her being shocked that I was stealing her. She couldn't figure out why her tampons were so low. She didn't use them that much. And I was just taking them every month. So and then we had to have that conversation. And it was just a very clear indication of the relationship and how the relationship was going to unfold for a long time. Like, we don't talk about this. This is unfortunate. This is bad. This is something we pretend isn't happening. Just all of those stories were getting put on to my menarche and my maidenhood. And it wasn't until I was 22 that I heard anything otherwise. So I was in that first marriage, seeking other things, seeking other ways out, other ways of being healthy. And I saw this comedy show of this woman who was talking about all sorts of eco things. And she said she wanted to be eco-friendly down there. And so she looked up ways of not creating waste, and she found menstrual cups. And it was the first time anybody had ever talked about diva cups or about reusable pads, and like organic cotton reusable pads. And she did this whole funny bit about getting the cup stuck and like not being able to get the cup out. And it was the funniest comedy routine ever, because she had her back turned to the audience with like the microphone, and she'd talk over her shoulder. She's like reading the box label and like squatting down. And like, it was so, I went back to see the show twice because it was just so funny.
More comedy things I need to look into.
Yeah, I don't know if she's doing anything anymore, but yeah, because this was a while back. It was like early 2000s. It was the first time I'd ever heard anybody talk about other types of menstrual products to honor the body. And I went out right away to the closest health food store I could find and got my own Diva cup and figured it out. And again, I'm very blessed. It fit perfectly. I didn't have to worry about like what a lot of women talk about, size things being weird. And trying out multiple cups, because there weren't any multiple cups on the market back then. That was it.
Just that one, yeah.
Just that one. And it worked. And so I was like, okay, cool. This is what I'm going to use from now on. So it's been over a decade now that I've used cups on some level. And that led to like a new menarche. in a certain way, where I started exploring my blood. I started realizing that my blood had different, like, viscosity. Like sometimes it had clots in it. Sometimes it was really bright red. Sometimes it was brown. Like I never had an understanding of it before that point. And that year I also got off birth control. So that new menarche was like, everything was wonderful from that point. So it was this combination of finally being in touch with the physical blood itself, with making choices for myself, stories for myself, and really being in tune with my own cycle for the first time since I was a child. So it had been 12 years of pushing it away, and then 4 years of birth control at that point. And I was just like, I'm done. I feel like no emotion at all, ever. This is awful. And I had been on a mixture. Like I started out with a pill, and then I also did NuvaRing, and then like someone had suggested patches, and I was like, oh, this feels weird. No, no, no. And I had gone back to the pill at that point, and then I was like, no, we're not going to take this next pack, and just stopped. And my first husband was really worried because he wanted to have kids, and I was like, don't worry, or not.
You knew.
That's not gonna happen. It was the first time I started tracking my cycle because I didn't want to get pregnant, not because I wanted to. So it was that was clear indicator. And just like most people say, if you meet somebody while you're on birth control, chances are that when you get off of it, it won't click the same way. And that definitely came through. So the following year, I ended up divorcing him and falling in love like 5 times. Just having this gorgeous, gorgeous deep dive into priestessship, in the sense that I was sitting in daily meditation at my altar in devotion to goddesses of love and sexuality and womanhood, and taking milk and honey baths, like literally pouring them into the bath and like covering myself, and just like, and I'm giving myself a blood facial for the first time, and like just really deep diving into all of the sensualness of womanhood. And it's with that we'll go to the next phase of the wheel, which is the sexuality and sensuality. So with the way she divided it up, the next one is called, my brain just stopped for a second, Kamalatmika. And Kamalatmika is the partner of Kama. So when we think of Kama Sutra, it's that duo, like very loving and passionate, and awakening her for the first time, realizing I didn't need a man to validate any of those feelings. And I wanted a man, and that was great too. But I didn't have to have one at the time. And being in a state of really relishing all the different phases of when that libido would rise and then when it would fall, and like, what do I do in those times, and noticing that. So it was a different kind of cycle that I was tracking with her. And that lover quality was still in a maiden space. And this is what I love about what Uma's wheel does, where we can be lovers in partnership, but we can also be lovers in maidenhood. And that maidenhood lover is an entirely different archetype, because she's what we would, the word that we use in the Bible for virgin is actually a different word in Greek. It's kore, which means a maiden who is free unto herself. She's not married to anybody. She's not celibate. She's not beholden to any children or jobs or responsibilities. Like, that's a true maiden, where she can be as sexually free as she feels like, because she's not held down in any particular way. She's not she's free from all responsibilities. And that kind of sexuality was a very fun place to explore in my mid-20s. And that led to a resurgence of creativity. I had been putting all of my energy into creative art projects, and then all of a sudden new ones were coming out once the lever turned on. And that's the next phase on the wheel. And did you ever listen to MIA?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you listen to her album Matangi?
I think so, yeah.
That's the name of that goddess, Matangi.
Okay.
So
Wow.
Tripura Sundari is the maiden, then Kamalatmika is the first maiden lover. And we can always tap back into her. And we have to in order to get Bhuvaneshwari to turn on, because you can't become a mother unless you're making love. So she will come back, but it is that maiden lover. And then the next one, who's that sister on the other side of the coin, Matangi, is the wild creative force. So it's not the refined, civilized, demure creative force that Saraswati
Mhm.
in Indian culture represents. It's the performance artist in the woods throwing blood on herself and like raging while
Yep.
like all of the art critics are standing around quietly applauding. She's that kind of one. And it's awesome and wonderful to tap into her, because sometimes um, that raw creative force, when we've domesticated it too much, um, becomes so stale that we don't want to engage with our creative expressions anymore. And having her constantly present allows for that flow state that all of the guys like Aubrey Marcus are so obsessed with. Those like, neurotropics are supposed to handle. Like, no, just open up your creativity,
Yeah.
open up your sexuality, open up your literal ability to pour things out of your body, because we're goddesses who bring life into the world. So it's that capability without birthing babies. It's that
Mhm.
um, willingness to let go once the thing is made, which a lot of artists don't know how to do. And
Yeah.
me having multiple art degrees was obsessed with that goddess for a while, because I
Yeah.
had gotten so rigid of this is what's expected in dance, this is what's expected in theater, this is what's expected in music. And if I stray from any of those expectations, then art will not be good. And what is art for? It's not for that. So being able to open her up, and seeing how the two walk hand in hand. And then when
Mm.
those culminate into a responsible partnership, into a very conscious, intentional walk with another, is when the mother steps in.
Mm.
And I think a lot of women who maybe are like in your phase, where you're like 1 foot in maiden, 1 foot in mother, because you're wanting it, but you're not doing it
Yeah.
yet. Like,
Yeah.
where do we stand? What's going on? Matangi kind of comes in a lot of ways, because you're creating podcasts, you're creating circles, you're creating all sorts of things. You're
Mhm.
just not birthing a baby yet. And
Yeah.
so there's an archetype to tap into, so that we aren't feeling like we're still maidens.
Yeah.
She's a creatrix, and that's what she holds. So it goes maiden, maiden lover, creatrix. And then if they're like, oh, I choose you, then that one comes in who allows for the mother to blossom. And a seed does have to be planted. There has to be a connection with another for that mother archetype to actually unfold. And she has multiple layers inside of herself. And just like they have these coins that of like faces of, this one is a lover, this one's creatrix, and you can just flip it and see which one shows up today. The mother one has her postpartum one. And
Mm.
when women conceive, they don't always bring a baby into the world. And we've seen that really recently with Nancy Lucina, and like, my heart still goes out to her.
Yeah.
Where she had a baby and then the baby is no longer here. And like, what do we do with that? And there's women who miscarry even sooner, and women who have stillbirths even later, and women who are desperately trying to get pregnant for years and years and years, and they're mourning while conceiving. Like, how do we hold all that? And it's because the next two goddesses are two goddesses on different sides of the same coin. Bhuvaneshwari is the mother goddess, and in India, she's like very much like Lakshmi. She's the fullness of everything.
Mm.
And then Chinnamasta is the one I described earlier, who has the head cut off and the sisters on either side of her. And with those two, it really illustrates the way that motherhood is no cakewalk, but also is the most divine, amazing blessing ever. Like it's really impossible to describe until one is in it, I feel like. And I always equate it to being like on the threshold of something where you can see through a little bit. You can see like there's more beyond this doorway. I can see through the doorway. I have an idea of what I'm going to encounter. I can stand in the doorway. I can feel it coming. But until I walk all the way through, I won't be able to explore the rooms. I
Mm-hmm.
won't be able to really witness everything that's beyond this space. And once I'm through, there's no going back. I can't go back to this space that I was in
Wow.
before. It's gone. The door shuts.
Yeah.
Um, and every time a woman gets pregnant, she's walking through that doorway because every single time, every birth is different, every baby is different, every woman is different on the other side. And I think that's why Chinnamasta is in such a state of, well, like, I mean, her head's cut off. Her ego is gone. Her idea of self is gone. Her understanding of the world is gone because she's walked through the doorway fully. And whether that has resulted in a baby or not, a woman still passes through because her understanding of herself is going to change if she becomes pregnant and then whatever's on the other side. And when we're in a really nourished postpartum, we will have women on either side of us catching those tears, catching that blood, catching anything that's wanting to come up and out of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be healing for them to witness as much as it is healing for the woman to receive.
Mm.
So those two goddesses are where I'm dancing right now.
Yeah, tell me more about that. Like, I can imagine that with each, you have three children. I can imagine that with each one, there's been, I would guess, like more of a deepening into knowing yourself.
Definitely. There's like the first one was it was a really beautiful birth, but a really trying pregnancy and a really up and down postpartum where my husband and I had only been living together for 4 weeks when we got pregnant.
Wow. I knew it
So
was soon, but I didn't know it was that quick.
it was like I moved out to live with him, and then by Christmas, that was December, that was the first week of December, and we conceived on Christmas. So that was that.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I told him, he didn't receive it very well at first. And there were a couple days that were very fraught and scary as a
Yeah.
woman to be like, oh God, am I going to be a single mom?
Or
Like
like, yeah, am
what's
I going to be
happening?
okay? Like on a very primal level, am I
Yeah.
safe?
Am I safe? And then he apologized profusely and was like, I asked for this with you. I told you that we were going to have children together like when we met. So I called this in and I'm going to own that. And I am here for you 100%. What do you want to do? And I was like, birth at home. And he looked at me like, why are you crazy? Because I was rocking his world in so many ways with all of these like weird things of no, don't use that soap, it's bad for you. No, that has artificial ingredients. Oh my God, put that down. So, you can't
I've
have a
got one of
TV in
those
the
too.
bedroom. I was literally changing his life like on every level in that way. And he was changing mine in other wonderful radical ways where I was doing his yoga teacher training program and like he was guiding me on so many other things about responsibility and codependency and like how to step
Mhm.
into my own. And because I was navigating old patterns of codependency, I didn't fully voice what I could have voiced in a lot of places within the pregnancy because I was scared of what
Mm,
he would do or say.
mm.
And um, it led to hiring a midwife who is not how do I phrase this? In the phase of life where she was in, she was not well resourced.
Okay.
She did not have the ability to make proper decisions at that time. Her mother was like very ill in the hospital, I think, from before we even met.
Oh, wow.
And she heard my desire to have no ultrasounds. She heard my husband's desire to know if it was a boy or a girl, and his lack of trust that I knew it was a boy. He wanted proof and said, oh, there's a really easy test you can take that will tell you boy or girl. And knowing what I know now, I could have gone into a drugstore and taken that test. But she
Mm.
said, just let me draw your blood. And she ran a full genetic panel without disclosing that that's what she was going to do.
Ah.
She technically had my consent because I signed the paper, but I didn't understand at all
Yeah.
what was going on. And when she did, all these red flags came up. And we walked this very intense journey for the next 10 weeks. I was week 12. And so it wasn't until week 22 that everyone finally believed me that my child was totally fine and it was a boy and he was healthy and we were great. There was the amount of ultrasounds that happened, like, still grieves me. Like, I still feel grief thinking about it because they were trying to look for what was wrong and why all these tests were coming up weird. And I ended up firing her because she told me if I went to Planned Parenthood, they wouldn't ask questions because clearly the baby wasn't going to survive.
Oh my God.
My son's 8 now, so just in case she's listening. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of women might hear this and be like, well, why didn't you want to know that information? And it's like, this is why, is because it's wildly inaccurate.
Yeah, and even if it was accurate, like, I have a friend right now whose baby is still in the NICU. She just got transferred out of state to a new hospital where the specialist is, and she's sitting beside her baby every day who has a very, very apparent genetic abnormality. And she loves that baby dearly, but her whole family's broken apart. And she had a beautiful pregnancy because even though her midwife told her, go get this ultrasound, and the ultrasound tech said, something's odd. Do you want to do testing? She said, no, thank you. And she had a wild pregnancy for the rest of the time. She birthed in freedom at home, outside in her, like, sun shower. Like, it was glorious and sweet and wonderful. And then they called 911 because the baby could not breathe, physically incapable of breathing on her own. And she still is. Like, it had nothing to do with first breaths. It had nothing to do with any of it. She knew in the back of her mind that was a possibility, but she didn't want to play that out during her pregnancy. She wanted to have that deep connection that she knew was possible.
Yeah,
So
that's beautiful.
Like, knowing what I know now, I would have said, no, thank you.
Yeah.
You sit your butt down. It's a boy. You walk away. I don't want my blood drawn. But I wasn't that woman then.
Yeah.
And that was part of my initiation, was to step into being the woman I am now and to know my no's and to really stand firm in my no's and to stand firm in my yeses. And then with the second baby, I wanted a home birth because I ended up having a birth center birth for the first one. And she was like the best midwife I've ever met. And she's not practicing anymore. It's awful. She came in and I think she did one vaginal check, which for birth center is like nothing. She did one maneuver thing where because of that vaginal check, she wanted me to, like, kind of twist my body around, which that was the only moment I recall as painful.
Yeah.
Because my body was doing something it didn't want to do. But that was it. She didn't mess with me. She didn't do a lot of vitals. She didn't do Doppler from what I remember. And I remember very, very clearly feeling the urge to bear down and looking to her as the authority and saying, what do I do? Because it was my first baby and I'm brand new to this and disconnected from my mom, all sorts of stuff. And she looked at me and she's like, what do you feel like you should do?
Wow.
I go, I want to push. She said, and push. And it was the best. Like, I don't know many medical midwives who would have handed the authority back to a mother, a first-time mother, that way. And she let me be the one who felt from that point on. And I was like, what's going on? And she said, reach your hand down and feel.
Wow.
So it was my hands that touched him first. And, like, oh, it's just such a gift. What a gift that she gave me in that space of a very medicalized birth center that could have been much more filled with interventions and other things. And I'm eternally grateful that she was the one on call that day and not the other ones. So that being said, I didn't want to go to birth center again. I didn't want to put my baby in a car seat to go home after having given birth. I wanted to snuggle up and stay in bed. And my instinct was to then look for an older midwife. For some reason, I assumed that by being much older, she would be like Ina May's generation and nicer.
Yeah.
And didn't realize that Ina May Gaskin was, like, super OB trained too at that point.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about becoming a midwife. I was thinking about becoming a doula. I was thinking about doing more women's work. After that first birth, I was just so obsessed with helping other women have beautiful births
Mm.
that I wanted to create more of it. And I also was ready for another initiation because I hadn't aligned in the mother wound issues that I
Mm.
had. So that's what I ended up looking towards, was a woman who would provide that mother space that I was seeking.
Yeah.
And um, fast forward, it was a really beautiful pregnancy. We developed this really sweet relationship. Everybody was talking about whose football team was going to win, and like her family and my husband's family came from similar areas, and like it felt like a very familial, trusting relationship. And then uh, right near the end, when I was in a space of transition and wanting to be inward, she was asking me to come outward, and she moved me to a place where it was more comfortable for her to support, not where my body wanted to be.
Mm.
And that video, that 7 minutes of the last bit of that before when he was coming out, um, Yolanda Norris Clark had used as an example of what not to do in her private community online. She said, "Oh, look, this is a really good birth story, birth study for what not to do as a midwife." And the amount of minutes that the woman's hands are in my body, feeling around,
Oh,
pushing, manipulating, Dopplering, doing things. And then she physically pulls my son out.
no.
Yeah, she yanked him multiple times. And was everybody was yelling, everybody was shouting, it was just very intense. And that's the child who's ended up in the ER multiple times for accidents. So like he chose an intense lifetime, and we're changing that narrative. We're changing it to say he can soften. Things don't have to be so intense for him to experience initiation. They don't have to be so intense for him to
Yeah.
get the message across that he wants a little more attention as the middle child. So so we're working on that, but the births of those two are so indicative of their behavior and their
Wow.
personality and the way that they move through the world.
Yeah, of
And
course.
then that during that postpartum phase, when I was in that raw Chinnamasta open state, is when I heard a podcast about free birth for the first time.
Mm.
And I wailed because I realized I had made a choice, and the choice I had made had led to the experience I had. And I could have made a different choice. I just hadn't been aware of it at the time.
Yeah.
And the knowledge that free birth existed after that birth wrecked me, and I stepped away from all women's work for several years, where I didn't want to be in circle space. I didn't want to talk about birth. I didn't want to tell anyone that they could choose a natural birth, because I had chosen a natural birth. I had chosen a home birth. I had chosen a midwife, and look what happened. And um and I didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And so my husband and I decided to have a wedding instead of a baby. And we got married. Um, and our kids were in it, and it was really sweet, and
That's
their little
cute.
tuxedos, and it was great. And then after that, I was like, hey, do you want to do this again? Do you want to have a baby again? And I had been creating more. I was very much in that Matangi creatrix space, but I could feel it building towards wanting to step back into the motherhood portal.
Yeah.
And um, it was our second son saying, yeah, I'd be a great big brother, that inspired my husband to be like, I guess we could do this again.
Oh,
And I remember really sitting down with him and talking about conscious conception. And this is like when we really truly stepped into conscious conception of, we're going to call in a baby who is wanting to be in our family, who's wanting to make the world a better place, who's wanting to explore in a very conscious, aware, deliberate way. We're going to call in a baby who's divine on so many levels, and you're going to be Osiris and I'm going to be Isis, and the baby's going to be Horus, and it's going to be great. And we really were having these deep conversations, and we're like, okay, not this month, because then it's going to be a Pisces, and I don't know if I can handle that. We were like timing it on purpose. And then I felt like I might have been pregnant.
mm.
And then my blood came too soon. And I was like, this is interesting. I had a period not too long ago, like a full 5-day great blood. And this is only 10 days later, what's going on?
Mm.
And I went to go see a body worker that our family sees a lot. And he does like not just chiropractic, like a lot of other things. And I was laying on the table and I looked at him and was like, I think I miscarried. And he breathed out. And with that, I felt this gush of blood come and was like, oh my God, I had a miscarriage. Whoa. And like grief just poured through me because I hadn't had the realization up until that point. And it was a brand new, like you can't even see the thing type of baby. And I still felt that immense grief because I had been wanting to conceive.
Of
And suddenly,
course.
like, it opened up so many other points of wisdom in my life of like, oh yeah, it's a 100% no for me to ever release a pregnancy personally. Like I understand other women who do it, but for me, that's a solid no. Okay, I didn't know that was a no before. It's a solid yes to conceive again. Okay, that's great to know. It's a solid no to pursue this business venture because that was what was happening when I was going through the miscarriage, and like it's a yes to go this way. And like there were so many things that got cleared up. And it's why I think that no matter how early the miscarriage happens, that healing wisdom of that Chinnamasta phase comes through because the woman's body is open and it's open to receive intuition and wisdom from the experience of that blood pouring out. And so I was super, super grateful. And then like super, super, please get me pregnant afterwards.
You were ready.
I was so ready. I let myself grieve. I let myself like be in that space and just like wallow and melt for a few days because I wanted to acknowledge it, that it had happened.
Of course. Well, I think that there's, a lot of women who maybe feel that having an early loss means that it shouldn't be so deep and something to grieve. But it's like you were still carrying life in your womb. Like, of course, there's something to grieve that life is now moved along.
and like the story I've made up in my head is that was my daughter. I
Mm.
haven't had a daughter. And I felt this like twin energy when I did get pregnant
Oh,
with
wow.
my third. So I wondered like, oh, because in mythology, Apollo has a twin, Artemis, and she's born first.
Wow.
And she's the midwife for Apollo's birth. She's the spirit like guiding the mother as she births the god.
Wow.
And it was like about 2 weeks. Yeah, like perfect ovulatory time when my husband and I were sitting in the kitchen chatting, and he turned and looked at me and said, what do you feel about the name Apollo? Oh, I like it.
Wow.
And it instantly, both of us, it was a solid yes. We had sex. We were pregnant. Like
Wow.
within a day of
Amazing.
inviting that name in, it was like, yes, that's a great name. That would be the name of the baby. And then, okay, here's the baby. It was just
Spirit baby's like, oh, they named me. Here I come.
got it. So that's part of the reason I was like, oh, maybe Artemis and Apollo, like the spirits were waiting. They
Mm,
were hanging out right
yeah.
there. But for some reason, my soul has written contracts to have sons in this lifetime. And the daughter was like, I'm still going to come through. I love you. I'm still here for you. You
Yeah.
have a lot of daughter energy. It's just you need the boys more right now for whatever growth
Mhm.
pattern that you've signed up for. So that it made sense. Like it made sense in my mind and it made sense in my body. Like I was able to kind of soften and relax and say, like, I'm not carrying twins. No matter how many times I poke this belly, I know it's just one baby. And it was like a fraction of a thought for a little while because this is funny, Natalie. My husband and we love making breakfast, and we love eggs and different kinds of eggs. And we kept cracking twin eggs. Every time we would open it, there'd be two yolks. And we'd look at each other. And
Wow.
it was like 5 days in a row of two yolks. And there might be twins. There might be twins.
No.
And it was like really early, so I wasn't showing a ton, so we couldn't tell. But it
Yeah.
just was happening so consistently that, and it was every single morning, both of us would crack an egg, and there'd be two yolks. okay,
That's
like,
amazing.
are omens real? What's happening? But then once I started really showing and I could feel the baby kicking, I was like, no, 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 there's just one
There's
baby in
just
there. But
one.
there were two souls and they were hanging out.
Yeah.
And because
Wow.
it was within that same, almost like that same cycle, essentially, that I did get pregnant after the miscarriage, that I'm not going to question it if that's really what was going on.
Yeah.
So then this baby, this was the fully wild pregnancy. And I was
Mm.
like, it's a boy again. Everyone's like, you're getting a girl. I said, no, no, it's a boy. And I have proof. I took one of those little like test your blood at home finger prick tests. And it came back as a very much there's Y floating around. And I said, I know it's a boy. And now, even though I know and people don't trust women's intuition, I have paper. I have a piece of paper that says this is a boy.
Boy.
And that was the only thing I did the whole pregnancy. I didn't check my blood pressure. I didn't check my blood sugar. I didn't check anything else that you could possibly check. I exercised, I lifted weights, I did yoga at least 3 times a week. It was just flourishing and it was wonderful. And the first baby kick that was felt outside of my body was by our second son, the one who was like, yeah, that could be a good big brother. So it was sweet that it was his hands that got to receive that.
That's
And then I I kept holding the vision of just being in that birth portal overnight so we didn't have to worry about anybody else being in the home to
mm,
entertain the older kids. And
mm,
that's what happened. I felt the kicks and the sensations so strongly that I couldn't ignore them or sleep through them around 10:30 at night. And he was born 5 a.m. So
wow.
like this really wonderful window of just me for a while, which is what I wanted. And
Yeah.
then my husband woke up and he was sitting with me for times. And then around 4:30, I said, turn on the ayahuasca playlist. And that's what got it going.
Perfect.
Like, okay, I got to throw up at least once, right? That's how this works. Now I can have the baby. And it was around that time that my noises got primal enough. Because before that,
Mm,
it was just like kind of deep breathing. It was around that time that the noises got loud enough that the middle, my middle son woke up, heard me, and then woke up my oldest and said, Mom's having the baby. And they came in and they watched. So they got to see my
wow.
husband catch him. They got to see all of us laughing hysterically. They got to see the placenta come out. And then they helped burn the cord. And they're like, it was all of these little men around me tending to me. So that like safety in the masculine came through so
It
much
came
because
through.
my husband's like got all the towels and the older boys like holding the placenta bowl and the middle boys got like the candles. It was gorgeous.
Ugh,
And yeah, it's just so, so sweet. They get to understand now how a woman's body works. They know about my moon bloods. They know about me pouring it on the garden afterwards. And they know what placentas look like. The oldest had his hands in it up to his elbows. He was like picking
ah,
it up and like pulling the sack and like stretching his hand inside the sack
that's
and
incredible.
exploring.
Like, just let him explore. That's amazing.
He was having a great time. We're like, are you done with that yet? We need to put it in the freezer. Hi, little one.
Oh.
So yes, that's where I'm at on the wheel, just to finish up the wheel. The
Yeah.
next goddess could be equated to what I think Nancy and Kristen would call the Maga.
Mhm.
In some other traditions, I've heard other people do maiden mother Maga crone.
Yeah.
And in the way that I've taught the red threads when I've done different women's groups is it gets broken down even further. So Chinnamasta is really holding the space of healer on the wheel because any woman can tap into healing. Any woman can experience loss. Any woman can have grief.
Yeah.
But she's so closely tied with motherhood. Most people don't realize like the joy and the grief are so embedded together in that space. So she fits there on the wheel, but she's always accessible. And the next woman is the sovereign. She's holding her own in a way that is not about just tending to another life the way the mother is. It's about really running her world in a way that is conscious and intentional and from choice. And on the wheel, that is Bagalamukhi, and her face is like really, really fearsome to behold. And it's that idea of like when a woman is standing fully in her power, it's awesome, literally awe-inspiring to see, and not everybody can handle that vision. So she holds this place of like terror in the hearts of those who are misaligned. So she looks ugly to them because they don't know how to witness her. But if you can look her full in the face, if you can embrace her fully, so if we can see all of our own misalignments and poor choices and things that we aren't proud of and face them fully, then we get to integrate them and make better choices moving forward. And that's what a sovereign does. So that's the next step. And it's before sorceress, it's before the Maga. Bhairavi. Bhairavi holds the opposite end of that lever. And in Indian texts, there's a book called the Bhairavi Tantras, and it's Bhairava and Bhairavi singing to each other about lovemaking and the masculine feminine dance, and about wisdom and growth through relationship and through partnership. And that magic that happens only when we are fully witnessed and seen and engaged in with another conscious person. And that's more like the Maga to me in a lot of ways. So there's like this extra space, and I love it because that sovereign space is what I think a lot of women who never have children get to step into. They just jump over the mother door. They go straight from maiden to sovereign, and it offers them an archetype. It offers them a place to stand that is not youthful in its imagery or its semantics, and it's also not designating them as mothers when they're not mothers, because that's a very unique experience that we need to, in my mind, really would be benefited by remaining a unique experience. I know some women who are like, I've entered the mother phase. When did you have a baby?
I know. I can see. I have heard some women say that too, like, oh, I don't have children yet, but I'm in the mother phase of my life, and it's hard for me not to roll my eyes. And in a sense, I get it, because like when we think of maidenhood and someone who's 35, like, and doesn't have kids, that doesn't really resonate for them. So I love that there's this space that you're sharing.
And I'm totally biased. I feel like you can they still are maidens when they're 35. I have friends who have not had kids, they're never gonna have kids, and they have that freedom from responsibility. They can choose to stay up late. They can choose to go out. They can choose to take a random trip. That's a maiden activity.
That's true.
Only maidens get to do that. Sovereigns actually are pretty well rooted because they've created a community. They've created a space that looks to them as the responsible one. And that's why I think it's women who've stepped either into positions where they are managing quite a lot of people, or where they've created spaces that others are using, like studio spaces that they're responsible for, or like things like that, where they're very much rooted in place. They're not doing the maiden thing of like, you know what, I've always wanted to go to Costa Rica. No, never mind, Bali. It's just like they don't do that. And that is a maiden thing. And you can be a maiden through your 50s. Cool. Do it. Have fun. That's not the life I chose, but I'm not going to begrudge you it. If you're having fun, have fun. When you step into sovereign, you step into authority. You step into a place of rulership, quite literally having others who are looking up to the choices that are being made by you. So I think that's where that jump happens. And because it's not a physical initiation, because it's not a physical embodiment, it's really difficult to pinpoint unless she creates the rite of passage for herself, unless she creates an initiation that's public for everyone to see, whether that's creating a business or creating a location or something like that. That's usually when the doorway is stepped through, in my mind, from just creatrix to sovereign.
I love that.
So I think the portal's still there. It's just we don't have a rite of passage in our culture to say, okay, you chose not mother. Let's play this little game of life board game. You're going to go on this road instead. And when you get to this stop sign, that means like we just don't, we don't have that.
Yeah.
So, but the phases in life they correspond to is premenopausal. So she's still bleeding. She's just not bleeding either as often or as regularly as she was in her youth. And that's the sovereign. And then menopause is the sorceress. And it's because it's a liminal space. We don't know that menopause has happened until after the fact. There has to be at least a year of non-bleeding to say, okay, I'm in the menopause. And then she could bleed again. And then we have to start the countdown.
Right.
So it's this really interesting, magical, trusting time because it's the reverse of menarche. And most of us don't honor that. And I know you just had someone recently who was talking about the beauty of menopause. So listeners can go over there for more of it. But that's why Bhairavi, the sorceress, is holding that spoke on the wheel, because it is this liminal, magical unknown and its own initiation in and of itself. And when we're able to totally tap into that, then we create a lot of magic in our lives. And it's our luteal phase. And when we're in that luteal and able to release fully and surrender fully is when the most magic flows in and our bleed becomes the most gentle and the most easeful. So that's what she's ushering. And in Uma's wheel, then the final archetype corresponds with bleeding, with the darkness, because we do tend to cocoon when we bleed. And so that is Dhumavati, the crone. And Dhumavati is always pictured with like crows all around her.
I love that.
She's like in a little carriage house and very skeletal, like grumpy old woman. It's like, don't talk to me right now. And that's how I feel when I'm bleeding. Like, don't talk to me right now. I just want to just hide under the covers and drink my bone broth. And I love that on the wheel because it is what we talked about before, where the sorceress, she's still making stuff happen. She can play, she can create, she can do. Dhumavati is the woman who recognizes, I am getting ready to die. And I don't know if it's like I'm just too in touch with the wheel sometimes, but I was getting like in the blood space, this I should really look up where I want to be interred. Like on the internet at 10 o'clock at night, like lying next to my babies, thinking, okay, this is the good green earth funeral where they keep you in an open casket, it's biodegradable, but this one they turn you into soil and you can be buried as a tree in a conservation park, so then you'd last forever. And going deep into my remains. And they're like, do you need help preparing for end of life? I'm getting all these emails now that are like, we can help you.
You're like, no, it was just my menstrual phase. I
was literally just bleeding. I'm sorry. But hey, now if anybody wants to talk about green eco burials,
you've got them.
I'm there. I'm ready.
It's funny to think of this like as a interesting like connection to your menarche, because it's like thinking you were dying because you were bleeding. It's like in a sense, like you were right. Like it is mini death.
It is. Childhood was over. It was done.
Yeah, and there's a grief there.
It is. It's fascinating how that wheel just keeps turning and it turns and it turns and it turns, and it equates to the moon phases and the cycles. It equates to the seasons. It equates to years. It's just so remarkable. And I love it that I have this map as a tool, and I want all women to have this map as a tool. And I periodically run like an online initiation through it all.
Wow.
I might do it again at some point, but not right now because we're figuring out too many boys' sports schedules.
Oh, wow. This has been so absolutely wonderful to hear sort of this wisdom wheel of women, but also interfaced with your stories kind of in each place. And yeah, I mean, before we kind of wrap up, I want to know if there's anything we missed. Is there any part of your story you still want to share?
Mm, I would say there's two parts, and they coincide with the story that I've shared about being able to say my full no's, being able to trust my
Mhm.
intuition, being able to step into a place of sovereignty, really. Um, and that's this whole wheel. I said it's spinning around the hub that is Kali. And
Yeah.
for any woman who's not familiar with the Kali archetype, you've seen her probably anytime you walk into a crystal shop. She's gonna be there. She's gonna be any yoga studio too. And she's got that tongue sticking out and the eyes bulging and like wild face. And she's standing on the body of her lover. And she's usually got at least 4 arms and several decapitated heads around her. She's vicious and ferocious, and her name means time. It's why she spins the wheel, because she is time incarnate, and time devours all of us in the end. And she is also our ability to stand in truth. She shows up when we are out of alignment, when we're out of integrity. And another archetype that's like a sister to her in Egyptian mythology is Sekhmet. And
Mm.
Sekhmet shows up when the gods aren't being honored. And we can look at that internally as our rage will come through when we are not honoring ourselves, when we are not honoring the truth that is at the core of us, Ma'at. And those two have come through very, very loudly for me, especially in postpartum times, because hindsight is 2020, and I would see the choices I had made either in my maidenhood or in my pregnancy or in my birth spaces, and I would see, oh, hey, this was a not good choice. This choice was totally spinning backwards instead of encouraging us to expand. And why did I make this choice? I made it out of fear. I made it out of guilt. I made it out of shame. I made it out of any number of things that were indicating that I wasn't integrating. I wasn't allowing my intuition to guide me. And so I was repressing some part of myself. And in that separation, I then made a choice that was going to lead me down the road that I've ended up now, that has ended in grief for whatever reason. And I'm angry. Who am I angry at? Not the midwife, not my husband, not my baby. I'm angry at me. And
Mm.
that's because I'm the one who made the choice. So then how do we process that anger? And really stepping into the softening. For Kali, it's Shiva who wakes her up, and Shiva is the ultimate witnessing. So it's really being able to witness that story and process that story and get the story out of the body, because Kali dances. With Sekhmet, it's the satiation of fully taking the story into oneself and resting and releasing
Mm.
on that level. And they both offer such potent medicine in that way. For me, when I'm engaging with goddess spirituality, I really mean it. Like their archetypes are guideposts for how to tap in. And that the reason Kali's the central hub is because anytime any one of those archetypes is not acting in her best interest, anytime a woman is in a space where it's out of integrity, out of alignment, Kali will come through. And she may come through as a reflection from someone else being angry, and
Mm.
she may come through internally as a reflection going outward of anger. But either way, she's going to be real loud until a new choice is made that adjusts and pivots from where that original misalignment was. So
Mm.
I love that she's that hub. And then the outer wheel, Tara, she's the grace. She's the recognition that each one of these spaces is divine in its own light. And each one of these spaces is going to connect us to our divine nature, no matter which doorway we choose. And every part of it is sacred. And being able to remember that all the time has been really potent as well.
Mm. Oh, wow. Such beautiful shares. I love that. Like the imagery I got is just in any season of life we're in, it's not fixed. It's like, first of all, we're going along this wheel and we're constantly evolving and becoming. And then there's these two forces, like one telling you to shake things up, and then another reminding you that you're sacred exactly where you are. And I think having those two is so important because I know for myself, it doesn't serve me when I'm only thinking everything is sacred and just going along and not changing any of my choices. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I guess this is just what's happening. Might as well like make it sacred. But I don't like it, but it's sacred, whatever.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't serve us, or it hasn't served me to only be in that like change my life all the time phase, or like this is wrong. It doesn't feel good. So it's time to move on to something else.
Mhm.
And so having both of those forces is powerful.
Yeah, they're beautiful, beautiful dance that we get to wiggle around in.
Amy, it's been so wonderful hearing your stories and just, yeah, having the honor to witness you share your wisdom. And I'm curious if there's one piece of womb wisdom, which is what I call these nuggets that we carry as women, that you'd like to leave the women listening.
Mm. Yeah, just choosing one, like the story of my life. Making one. Um, I would say if you do nothing else, like literally nothing else, to change lifestyle or habits or beliefs or whatever, and you can craft a very strong visualization between your heart and womb, like just sitting there. Um, Uma calls it a river, like the heart womb river. I like to picture it as like a column of light where the womb is nourishing and informing my heart, and my heart is nourishing and informing my womb, and the two are constantly exchanging light and love and wisdom. If a woman does that, I feel like she has the potential to change her entire life, because then she's coming from a very centered, rooted, and healthy place internally.
Mm. Yeah, so in resonance with that. In Chinese medicine, it's the Bao Mai channel, and the channel gives sort of a
Mm,
visual of the river too.
yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Amy. Well, to wrap up, I'd love for you to just share. I'm sure women are going to be wanting to learn much more. So if you want to share where they can find you and what your offerings are and all that good stuff.
Hey, yeah, thank you for having me. This has been fun. Like I said, I don't get to girl talk very often.
Yeah.
So getting to just wax poetic on all my favorite things that go
Oh,
on in
it's
my
so great.
head. Oh, so I am in Phoenix, Arizona. I occasionally do prenatal circles. We're in the flux of that because one of the mothers is now out of state with her baby. So we're figuring out how we're going to move forward. But we were doing it about monthly. And for those prenatal circles, I post on my social and in my newsletters. My social is Witch Goddess Mama, how it sounds. And I I might be doing, like I said, another round of those women's mysteries. I will be doing moon circles again soon. We'll just do new moon, and we'll focus on things like this, because that's what we started out with years and years ago, and it was so potent. And I also, like, in a parallel universe life, I'm an astrologer and astrology teacher, and I teach for Deborah Silverman's School of Astrology, and I do one-to-one astrology sessions for myself, if people want to do like tutoring as well as readings. And yeah, my website's just amysolara.com, and there's two paths that you can choose. You can choose all the readings paths, or you can choose all the womb wisdom birth paths, and I'm in the process of revamping it right now because I've had a lot of beautiful imaginings going on this summer of what it can look like. And Yeah, rebranding's never easy, but it's always worth it.
That's amazing. I love it. I mean, it all goes together. I'm like
It
anything,
does.
you know what my mom always told me, and this was about interior design, but I think it can be related to our lives in general, is like when I would my mom's very good at interior design. This is such an aside, but I'm gonna say this because I think it's fun.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, Mom, how do you know what goes? And she just said, if you like it, it goes. Like
Oh,
everything you like goes together, of course.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. This has been such a wonderful treat. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy. Thanks so much for sharing your stories and your wisdom. Thank you for tuning in to the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly an honor to bring these stories forward, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it can reach even more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to book a one-on-one virtual session in the show notes. See you next week.